as we're getting towards the end of that cocoon and we're about to break out, the energy in the organization is palpable because they can see that first little bit of light. Imagine that cocoon just opening a little bit, like what's inside. You have to be careful about doing this, but I'm doing a lot of changes at once.
Yes.
Right? We're
Yes, you
changing
are.
internally. Yes.
Welcome to Reedflections, a podcast on life, leadership, and learning. I am Art Calderon. I'm here with Reed Nyffeler. Reed is a CEO of a growing global franchise security company. He's also a husband and a father, now a podcaster and an author. And today we are going to continue in our series about developing authentic and intentional leaders. Episodes 24 through 28, which we're in the middle of right now, we're talking about leadership that lasts. And specifically today, we're talking about accelerate. Accelerating. That sounds exciting, right? We're moving forward fast, right? To accelerate. So tell us what it means. Tell us what it means to accelerate growth in an organization.
Yeah, and so accelerating is somewhat fun, right? I mean, there is a race cars we watch. We don't watch them going slow on the on the racetrack. If you're a NASCAR fan or Formula One fan, we watch them accelerate, and ultimately, as they're accelerating, that's the first way to get out ahead of everybody else. If we really look at that visually, you're accelerating to get out ahead, and that's the other thing is we as leaders, if we don't like progress or accelerating, I would ask you to say, are you really a leader? There are so many people that are trying to stifle growth and hold back. You're not the leader. There are other roles for you. But as a leader, you must love acceleration because that is what you're ultimately hired to do, is to move things forward instead of hold them back. And so that's really why it's exciting. And, any new idea is you can see the response of that ultimately. And that's where people love the new idea. But then it's the change, then the work that happens afterwards. But our objective is to make that change for the sake of acceleration. And so it's super critical to do that. And you're never going to have leadership that lasts without accelerating or moving forward, right? If we look back throughout time, the iconic leaders that we study, that we learn from, they're the ones that accelerated change in their particular generation or things that led to accelerated change. And so acceleration is super critical.
Now, you have a unique vantage point being the CEO of this particular company that we're at, Signal. Talk a little bit about what it's like to see that growth. What it's like to, you have the goal, you know what you want to see, but to actually see that growth and that's acceleration. What's that like?
It's a lot of fun. And I think even organizationally where we're at now, there is a transition and a metamorphosis as to where we're at. And so I think this is the analogy I've been using in that process is, as an organization recently, I would say in the last 3 to 4 years, there was a series of changes that I knew that the organization needed to have for the sake of further acceleration. And so we've been like a caterpillar, right? And so imagine that caterpillar on a branch. And I remember, in fact, I even used this book in an example of the hungry caterpillar that was growing up.
Yeah.
And if you kind of
Classic.
a classic, and we can learn so much from these children's books. And that caterpillar in that book was going from leaf to leaf, and it's building up and growing, right? And it's trying all these other things, and it's telling its story and journey. And we were really, as an organization, like that, right? We're absorbing things, we're growing, and it's a natural, directional, progressive thing, right? Where just as you see that caterpillar, it's largely going to stay on the branches of the tree, at least in that story, or the plant, whatever it was on. And then it's eating these leaves, and you see it growing and growing and growing. Then there's a period of time where that caterpillar goes into a cocoon, right? And I feel like we as an organization are there. And so as you're looking at accelerate, sometimes that is a pause for change. And then in that cocoon, you are then metamorphosizing, the organization is, to become a butterfly. And that's really where we're at right now. We're in this cocoon, and there's a series of changes that are happening, right? And so you see this caterpillar that everybody would say, hey, there's a cool caterpillar. Look at its characteristics. And that's something neat about that. But then there is a cocoon that happens, and you then come out as a butterfly. And as that butterfly comes out, think how much further and faster it can travel. Right. And ultimately garners so much more attention, and that accelerates its ability to live in its full self. And so the organization has to go each of those 3 phases, right? So we have this foundational start, right, where that caterpillar comes out and it's continuing to grow, and we are as an organization there. Then there's a time where change needs to happen. And then if that change happens, right, we appropriately regulate, right? That cocoon is the regulation. Then you could accelerate when you're a butterfly and you come out. And so that's really where that's at. And so understanding that, how does that apply in the business? I'm saying, okay, One, and this is somewhat of you have to be careful about doing this, but I'm doing a lot of changes at once.
Yes.
Right? We're
Yes, you
changing
are.
internal, yes, changing internal personnel. We're changing our technology. We're
Uh-huh.
changing the way we define our territories into
Uh-huh.
the form of lots. And all those things are changes happening at once. However, there's a cost to not changing them all at once as much as there's a cost to changing them all at
Right.
once. And so then I just have to be aware of that and
Mhm.
think through that. And so, however, what the exciting form for everybody is the outside of that and going forward. And so as we're getting towards the end of that cocoon and we're about to break out, the energy in the organization is palpable because they can see that first little bit of light. Imagine that
Mhm.
cocoon just opening a little bit, like what's inside.
Yeah.
You know, just like I remember as a child, we had these eggs, and at the time, you know, you could have hatched chickens, and we're like watching them day in and day out, day in and day out. And I think it's like 20, 28 days, something like that, a chicken hatch. And then you see that first little peck, that first little beak poking through the side.
Mhm.
And that's where we're at, that same metamorphosis, that same change, that something exciting is about to happen. And that's the beginning of acceleration, that little poke and that boom, you see where it goes. And then pretty soon you're chasing chickens all around the yard and realize they're a big mess too. But that's the next podcast,
That's gonna
right?
be our next-
That's our next one.
Stay tuned for that, folks. Very good. Now, you didn't do every single change you wanted to do at the same time. You're doing a lot. You did say that. We're doing a lot of changes right now. But talk a little bit about how a leader needs to be aware of what is too much, what can be, what's too overbearing and overload your people, and what to look out for if there's too much change all at once.
Yeah. And so, you know, that is exactly what you need to be paying attention to. And I'll talk about an organization that I used to work for in the past around that, because you could have a great idea and a great process just at the wrong time. And I think a couple of them make sense to me. And maybe I won't even talk about the organization I was at, but I'll use this analogy. I remember in the 90s, I believe it was Web Grocer, or there was some sort of web grocery delivery, right? There was this organization that was trying to basically have some sort of internet portal. You could order your groceries online, and then it would go to the store and then deliver the groceries. And they got a whole bunch of funding, and they thought, this is going to be great. We're going to have this grocery delivery process.
Yeah.
And then they thought, perfect, everybody eats, and it's a great clientele. And then it failed. It went bankrupt. It didn't make it. And here we are now 20 plus years later, and a very increasing percentage of society, and maybe driven and accelerated through COVID, order their groceries now online, and either one, have it delivered to the curb and they can just pick it up and somebody picks and packs, or two, has it delivered to their house.
Yeah.
And so that idea had merit. There was value in that. It was simplicity. Now the timing just wasn't right. The internet wasn't mobile, right? That was a big issue with it. They couldn't do it on a mobile phone in the 90s. Now we can. And then two, the product load and the timing to load it on the software wasn't readily available, so you can't make adjustments. Three, the stores were not set up to receive that well, right? They didn't know how to get it to the individuals. And then four, the consumers weren't conditioned to have things delivered to them. They still drove to the store themselves and do that. And so all those things are now resolved because people are, as consumers, have a mobile app. We want greater level of service. The stores have a device inside that can track those orders and confirm them and scan them and all these other things. And so the idea had great merit, but the timing wasn't right. And so we need to think about that as leaders and saying, is the idea great and is the timing right? Those two conditions have to apply, right? In fact, another example of that, and electric cars are more prevalent now, but they actually were a idea before the gas-powered car. So they had the steam-powered car that didn't work for a lot of reasons. They offered two solutions, which were the electric car, which they were just batteries, and of course they didn't go as far or fast, and then a fuel car. And now we took on the fuel car and built up infrastructure, and now we're going to the electric. So the timing just wasn't right. You couldn't charge the batteries the same way. Electricity wasn't as prevailing, and the battery and the storage of that electricity didn't work, and now it does work to a greater degree.
So, tell us about a time when you didn't get that acceleration timing right. Because you're the kind of guy, you like to think of the future. You like to move towards a goal, and you want people to come along with you or get out of the way. But that doesn't always work out, right?
Yeah, and so, my family will tell you, my wife will specifically tell you that I'm always like, what's the plan? Right? I don't care about what's the past. I care about what's the plan. So it's always thinking forward and looking forward, going forward. What's the plan? And she'll say, that's what you always say. And one, because I know progress, acceleration happens with a plan. And that plan allocates the timing. And so if I'm running late, I'm always like, all right, I got to get back on the plan because I'm not going to be able to accelerate because I don't want to miss this timing, what we just talked about. And so, right out of, as I turned 16, I was looking to get my first car, and I remember my dad coming to me and he's like, Reed, I think it's time for a car. I was probably 15 years old. I'm like, oh, awesome. He's like, go get the paper. And so I go out there, and it might have been just a ploy for me to get the paper so he didn't have to. So he's like, start looking for a car. So I go to the autos section, right? That's where they listed cars, and I'm looking for used cars. And I'm like, you know what? I'm a 16-year-old or soon to be, and this is going to be cool. I want to be a cool guy.
Get a cool car.
Got to get a cool car, and a Corvette was ideal. And so I go, Dad, I think this is the Corvette. And he said, wrong section. I'm like, what?
Wrong section of the paper.
Wrong section of the paper. And so he flipped to help wanted. He goes, here's how you get a car. You go get a job to get a car. Yeah. So clearly I recognized the economics associated with that wasn't going to be what I had thought. So I went and got a job, and I started working, and then I was able to buy my first car. And, to my, pride, I suppose, I did end up with a Vet.
Oh, a Vet.
I remember, I walked out to the parking lot with my siblings and friends, and I said, that's my Vet over there. And they're looking around, looking for this beautiful Corvette. And they go, what color is it? I said, it's brown. I'm like, not a lot of brown Corvettes, but whatever. Let's see. They couldn't see one. And what they realized or didn't realize at the time, I got a Chevette. Now, you can look this up if you're watching. There's a huge difference between a Chevette and a Corvette.
Google that, folks.
Google that, folks. And a big difference is acceleration, let me tell you, for one. Okay?
And price.
And price. Those are the two big differences among many other differences. Because it did have 2 doors, and it had a stereo.
Yeah.
And the other big difference is I don't think the ladies appreciated it as much as the Corvette, probably. So that's another difference. But I don't know. I didn't survey them. So it could have been, they could have done. I was still single either way. So it didn't really matter. But then I remember, driving this around, and I'd had it for about 6 months. And as we continue on that story, and, rules, as we know on the regulation podcast, wasn't my focus, let's say. No. And so I preferred to go off the beaten path, and I was in this area, and maybe I'd watched a little too much Dukes of Hazzard, and I still thought I had the Vet. And I was driving through this lot that had, weeds that were super high. And it looked like there was a little bit of a drop off, but I thought this will be fun. I'll just accelerate. And so then I'm driving with this to accelerate. And unfortunately, the 0 to 60 speed wasn't the same as a Corvette. So I don't know if I got caught in the air. Maybe the shocks lifted a little bit if I left off that ledge. But what ended up happening is I was nose deep into the ravine. And huge mistake, right? And so I was accelerating. The acceleration didn't happen, and I was nose deep into the ravine. And so ultimately the car was stuck there, and the hose popped, and then it was steaming out the front. I'm like, oh, what did I just do? And so then I'm like, this is a problem. I probably wouldn't have done that with a Corvette, but I would with a Chevette. And so then I remember I was like, this is before cell phone, so I had to walk home. It was about 3 miles because my car was stuck. I'm stuck there, and I did something really by myself. And so then I walk all the way home, and I remember telling my dad, he's like, get the shovel. It's like, okay. And so then he goes, get your brother. And so then I get my brother. I'll never forget this story. And so then I get my shovel to my brother. And the shovel didn't talk back. My brother's pretty upset. He's like, what the heck are you doing? Why do I got to come? The shovel, and I got 2 shovels. And so then it's a hot day, and we had to dig that thing out. My dad dropped us off. He said, I'll be back in an hour. And then he came back in an hour. We still had a ways to go. He's like, we'll be back in a couple of hours. So I ended up digging that thing out. And my brother was really upset with me, and I still think he'd be upset if I told that story now decades later, because why did I get roped into this? It was your stupid decision. And my dad wouldn't leave me to myself. But I realized that if you're going to accelerate, make sure you have the power to accelerate. If you are the Dukes of Hazzard, make sure you got that, when you're getting chased by the regulation or boss hog, make sure the power's in the car. And so some of that's timing and also the resource, right? My Chevette didn't quite have the power of a Corvette. Not to say a Corvette would have made that jump, but it probably would have get a little further, and I might have made the leap, and I wouldn't have been in the ravine. And so really, as you're preparing your organization to accelerate, make sure that 1, you have the right tools to do it. 2, you have the right timing. And 3, you ultimately accomplish the goal, because that can lead right there, and then you got to call your brother to dig you out.
So expand a little bit on that, because the temptation with a leader, especially one who's as visionary as you, is, man, let's just move forward. But you do have some regulation you got to consider. You have some variables. You got other people around you. So how do you monitor all of that and to make sure that you make that right decision?
Well, and these are the things that I have learned as a leader over time is, how do I evaluate these things, right? Do I look at it holistically and say, okay, what are the people that I have? Are they able to do this, right? Just like the horsepower in the particular vehicle that I had. And, what are the circumstances? Is it worth accelerating? Was it worth driving in that and jumping it? No, it wasn't in the end, right? Even if it did have the acceleration, what was the point, right? I mean, they weren't filming me And I wasn't Bo and Luke Duke. I mean, I'm sorry. And you know what? Quite frankly, I didn't have any money in there, actually. I was broke. So, I mean, none of that was conditions didn't apply. It was just for the sake of entertainment, which wasn't worth it in that end. And then ultimately, what's the desired outcome in the end? And does it help you accelerate? And so if those conditions don't apply, then don't even start. Now, if they do apply, then you look holistically. And so for me, I kind of have a grid of how I look at that and I say, okay, who are the people that are helping me with that? Ask them. Who are the people that are impacted by that? Ask them. And who are the people that are just bystanders that have experience in that? And ask them. And so if you really look at the framework around that, now you get a holistic perspective to truly accelerate once you have perspective.
So if a company wants to accelerate and a leader wants to accelerate a company, what are some of the conditions that they need to be aware of? It's like, yes, now is the time. I need to take advantage of this condition. What are they looking for?
So first, I'd look at the result of that. If it all worked, which largely is the way that we look at that, would it be worth it? Would it be worth it?
What's
right?
the ROI?
What's the ROI? And we'll go to that grocery delivery place. I think that was the case in the 90s, right? When that company started, the grocery delivery place was something that will work. And we see that manifesting itself now. However, what was missed is it feasible now? Right? This internet is relatively pervasive now. Back then they had dial-up, and you had your first websites getting established. Grocery stores existed. So if you look at a grocery store, yeah, we can pull it and put it in a bag, and we have drive-up, pick-up after you've shopped for your groceries. So what's the difference? We'll just pick it up for you. And so the supply lanes may have made sense. And then they say the cars are there. And so these things, the pricing, it's a service. We guarantee that we get this particular customer. So the motivation is there. But what was missing were the other elements. And that was, communication and feasibility, right? We didn't have mobile phones and technology there.
Right.
We didn't have an easy way to understand when that person is there or not, which is pretty difficult to understand because we can get food delivered. I mean, there's Uber Eats and all these places and companies that can do that, readily now. So it was a very viable idea, but the timing wasn't right. And so as we evaluate that, we look at it holistically and say, okay, yes, the grocery stores are here. Yes, the consumers are buying groceries. Yes, we have the product on the shelves and we can get service to deliver it. But what is missing is the technology and ultimately the communication component and marketing of that. And it's going to be too expensive to change behaviors right now. So let's just wait until now in the early 2000s or maybe even later. Those things have changed. And so then the timing makes sense. And so we can see in early 2000s or maybe even 2010 where we see Uber starting to gain traction and then see delivery services and mobile apps and the smartphones developed and we're able to then have access to it. Then we say, okay, now the timing makes sense. This idea, I sat on it for a period of time because other conditions weren't there. I'm monitoring and watching the conditions as they develop. Now it makes sense. As opposed to when we want to, because anytime we make those decisions, we say, I'll be a millionaire by,
Yeah.
and we overlook things that are really important and relevant to not miss,
Right.
and then we'll miss that. And so the other step of that is make sure that you overestimate the resources necessary.
Oh.
Because many times we underestimate, it's only going to take this long. It's only going to take this much money and it's only going to take this. Nope, I'm going to prepare the other side, right, on every front. And because there's going to be miscalculations. We can't see everything as a leader. We're taking a calculated risk, and that calculation is prepare accordingly to make sure that we have the appropriate resources to accomplish the goal.
Accelerate. Thank you very much, Reed, for sharing with us. That brings us to the end of our time. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in with us. Now, next time, on episode 27, we're going to talk about future state. Sounds like exciting times. In the meantime, I'm Art Calderon. Stay purposeful.
Now, if you were a leader trying to create an organization that had leadership that lasts, you can't do that without accelerating. However, you can accelerate and get right into a crash, just like I did. So when you are leading an organization and you're intent on accelerating, evaluate everything in that area. Who will it impact? Is the effort worth it? And do you have the resources to accomplish it? If you take a close look, not on the end result, but on the current circumstances, you will be able to accelerate your organization to lead to a better future state. I look forward to seeing how you accelerate as you are able to adopt these principles and move forward.